By 1750, almost 1 in 4 people in the colony were slaves. Today we tell about slavery and how it affected the history of the United States. Slavery is one person controlling or owning another. Some history experts say it began following the development of farming about 10,000 years ago. People forced prisoners of war to work for them. Other slaves were criminals or people who could not repay money they owed. Experts say the first known slave existed in the Sumerian society of what is now Iraq more than 5,000 years ago. Slavery also exists among people in China, India, Africa, and Middle East and the Americas. It expanded as trade and industry increased. This increase created a demand for a labor force to produce goods for export. Slaves did most of the work. Most Asian people thought of slavery as a natural condition that could happen to anyone anytime. They few saw it as evil or unfair. In most cities, slaves could be freed by their owner and become citizens. In later times, slaves provided the labor needed to produce products that were in demand. And sugar was one of these products. Italians established large sugar farms beginning around the 12th century. They used slaves from Russia and other parts of Europe to do the work. By the year 1300, African blacks had begun to replace the Russian slaves. They were brought or captured from North African Arabs who used them as slaves for years. By 1500, Spain, Portuguese, By the 1500, Spain and Portuguese have American colony. The Europeans make native Indian work in large farms and mines in the colonies. Most of the Indians died from European disease and poor treatment, so the Spanish and Portuguese began to bring in people from West Africa as slaves. France, Britain, and the Netherlands did the same in the American colonies. England's southern colony in North America developed a farm economy that could not survive without slave labor. Many slaves lived on large farms called plantations. These large farms produced important crops traded by the colony, crops such as cotton and tobacco. Each plantation was like a small village owned by one family. That family lived in a large house, usually facing a river. Many separate buildings were needed on a plantation. For example, a building was needed for cooking, and buildings were needed for workers to produce goods such as furniture that we use on the plantation. The plantation business was farming, so there also were barns for animals and buildings for holding and drying crops. And there was a house to smoke meat, so could be kept safely. And there was a place on the river from which goods were sent to England on ships. The plantation owner controlled the farm and saw that it earned money. He supervised, fed, and clothed the people living on it, including the slaves. A big plantation might have 200 slaves. They worked in the field on crops they would be stored or eaten by the people who live on plantation. They also raised animals for meat and milk. Field slaves work very long and hard. They work each day from the time the sun rose until it set. Many of these slaves live in extremely poor condition in a small house with no heat or furniture. Sometimes 5 or 10 people live together in one room. House slaves usually live in the owner house. They did the cooking and cleaning in the house. House slaves worked fewer hours than field slaves, but were more closely supervised by the owner and his family. Law approved in the southern colony make it illegal for slaves to marry, own property, or earn their freedom. This law also did not permit slaves to be educated or even to learn to read, but some owners permitted their slaves to learn their freedom or give them money for good work. Other owners punished slaves to get them to work. These punishments include beating, withholding food, and threatening to sell members of a slave family. Some plantation owners executed slaves suspected of serious crime by hanging them or burning them alive. History experts say that people who were rich enough to own many slaves became leaders in their local areas. They were members of the local governments. They attended meetings of the legislature in the capital of their colony, usually 2 times a year. Slave owners had the time and the education to greatly influence political life in the southern colony because the hard work on their farm was done by slaves. Today, most people in the world condemn slavery. That was not true in the early years of the American nation. Many Americans thought slavery was evil but necessary. Yet, owning slaves was common among the richer people in the early 1700s. Many of the leaders in the colony who fought for American independence owned slaves. This was true in the northern colony as well as the southern ones. One example is the famous American diplomat, inventor, and businessman Benjamin Franklin. He owned slaves for 30 years and sold them at his general store, but his idea about slavery changed during his long life. Benjamin Franklin started the first school to teach black and later argued for their freedom. Slavery did not become a force in the northern colony mainly because of economic reasons. Cold weather and poor soil could not support such a farm economy as was found in the south. As a result, the north came to depend on manufacturing and trade. Trade was the way colonists got the English goods they needed. It was also the way to earn money by selling products found in the New World. The New England became a center for such trade across the sea. The people who lived there became shipbuilders so they could send the product to England. They used local wood to build the ships. They also sold wood and wood products. They became businessmen carrying goods around the world. The New England shipbuilding town near the Atlantic Ocean grew quickly as a result. The largest of these towns was Boston, Massachusetts. By 1720, it had more than 10,000 people. Only 2 towns in England were larger, London and Bristol. More than 25% of the men in Boston had invested in shipping or worked in it. Ship captains and businessmen held most of the public office. The American colony traded goods such as whale, wine, ginger, iron, wood, and rum, and alcoholic drink made from sugarcane. Ships carried these goods from the New England colony to Africa. Then they were traded for American people. The African had been captured by enemy tribesmen and sold to African slave traders. The New England boat captain would buy as many as they could put on their ship. The conditions on these ships were very cruel. The Africans were put in so tightly they could hardly move. Some were chained. Many killed themselves rather than live under such conditions. Others died of sickness, did the blood on the ship, yet many did survive the trips and became slaves in the southern colony or in the Caribbean island. Black slaves were needed to work on Caribbean sugar plantation. In the Southern American colony needed then to work on the tobacco and rice plantation. By 1750, almost 25% of the total number of people in the American colony were black slaves. From the 1500 to 1800, Europeans sent about 12 million black slaves from Africa to America. Almost 2 million of them died on the way. History experts say English ships carried the greatest number of Africans into slavery. One slave ship captain came to hate what he was doing and turned to religion. His name was John Newton. He stopped taking part in slave trade and began a leader in Anglican church. He is famous for having written the song Amazing Grace. This program was written by Nancy and produced by Paul Thompson.